You think you're waiting, but something inside you already knows the truth. This message didn't arrive by accident. It found you because your consciousness reached a precise threshold in the quantum field, a point where waiting dissolves and activation begins. You may have told yourself you were in a pause, a holding pattern, a liminal space between what was and what's coming next. But that story was only a surface translation. Beneath it, your observer loop has already started to fracture. You can feel it if you're honest. That subtle pressure behind your thoughts, that quiet hum in your chest when everything goes still, the sense that time has been behaving strangely around you, stretching in some moments, collapsing in others. This isn't boredom. This isn't confusion. This is what happens when your consciousness begins to slip out of passive observation and into active coherence with a higher timeline. The quantum field does not respond to effort, it responds to readiness. And readiness doesn't look like action on the outside. It looks like stillness charged with intent. That's why your life may have seemed suspended lately, as if the universe asked you to wait while something unseen aligned behind the scenes. But here is the revelation your nervous system is just beginning to recognize. You were never waiting for the shift. The shift was waiting for you to stop looking for it. Right now, your awareness is touching the edge of what physicists and mystics describe as a phase transition, a moment where the old pattern can no longer sustain itself. Your observer function, the part of you that collapses reality through attention, has been repeating the same probability wave for years. Same emotional arcs, same cycles, same near breakthroughs that never quite landed. And yet, recently, something changed. The repetition began to feel unbearable. Not painful, but intolerable, as if your soul rejected the loop altogether. That rejection is not rebellion, it's awakening. You didn't arrive here because you need more information. You arrived because your consciousness reached a level of coherence where recognition becomes inevitable. Synchronicity didn't guide you to this moment. Entanglement did. A resonance between who you've been and who you're becoming finally overlapped. And when that happens, the illusion of waiting collapses instantly. Notice how your body is responding as you listen, the breath deepening on its own, the slight release in your shoulders, the way your attention feels sharper, more present, less scattered across past regrets and future projections. This is not imagination. This is your nervous system recalibrating to a new frequency. DNA doesn't only carry biology, it carries memory. And right now, something ancient inside your cells is recognizing the signal. You were taught that change comes after effort, after struggle, after time. But quantum reality doesn't move in lines. It moves in jumps. And jumps don't announce themselves with noise. They arrive as silence that feels charged, moments where nothing happens externally, yet everything reorganizes internally. This is why the waiting felt so heavy. Because you weren't idle, you were undergoing restructuring. You are not behind, you are not late, you are not stuck. You are in the exact moment where the observer loop loosens its grip and the field begins responding differently to your presence. The activation didn't start when you clicked play. It started when you stopped believing you were waiting at all. And now that you've crossed this recognition point, there is no return to unconscious repetition. From here, you don't chase the shift. You notice it. Now that you've felt it, you can't unfeel it. The subtle recognition has opened a door, and through that opening, you can finally see what's been quietly shaping your experience all along. The feeling you called waiting was never emptiness. It was repetition, disguised as stillness. The same emotional weather cycling through different days, the same internal conversations wearing different costumes, the same sense that life keeps almost changing, but not quite. This is the signature of an observer loop. An observer loop forms when your consciousness keeps collapsing, the same probability wave in the quantum field, not because you choose it consciously, but because familiarity feels like safety to the nervous system. Even discomfort can become familiar. Even limitation can feel predictable enough to trust. And so your awareness, doing what it was trained to do, keeps selecting what it already knows. You may have noticed this as déjà vu, not the dramatic kind, but a quieter, more unsettling version. Conversations where you already know how they'll end. Opportunities that feel promising but dissolve into the same outcome. emotional reactions that arise before the moment even fully unfolds. It's as if your body knows the script before the scene begins. That's because it does. Time distortion is one of the clearest symptoms. Some days feel endless, heavy, dense, as if every minute has weight. Other weeks disappear entirely, leaving you wondering where your life went. This isn't poor memory or distraction. It's what happens when consciousness replays the same internal pattern while the external clock keeps moving forward. Motion without progression, change without transformation. You may have tried to fix this by doing more, learning more, healing more, understanding more. But effort doesn't dissolve an observer loop, it reinforces it. Because effort keeps attention locked onto the problem, and attention is the very mechanism that sustains the loop. The loop feeds on recognition. Every time you think, here it is again, the pattern tightens. Every time you anticipate disappointment, your awareness collapses a reality where disappointment is available. Not as punishment, as precision. This is where most people misunderstand the observer effect. They think observation creates reality through desire or belief. But the deeper truth is more subtle and more uncomfortable. Observation creates reality through expectation embedded in attention. What you expect isn't always what you want. Often, it's what you've rehearsed. Your nervous system learned these rehearsals early. Emotional tones, relational dynamics, internal pressures. Over time, your consciousness became efficient at finding them. Efficiency is not intelligence, it's habit. And habit, when paired with awareness, becomes a loop. This is why the problem has felt so difficult to name. Nothing was wrong enough to demand escape. Your life may have looked functional, stable, even successful by external standards. But internally, something kept whispering, this isn't moving. Not forward, not deeper, just cycling. The loop doesn't announce itself as pain. It announces itself as sameness. And sameness is dangerous to an evolving consciousness. As your awareness matured, the loop that once felt tolerable began to feel suffocating. The same inputs stopped producing meaning. The same goals stopped generating energy. The same identity stopped fitting. This is not loss of motivation. It's a mismatch between your expanding consciousness and an outdated probability structure. You were no longer meant to improve this loop. You were meant to exit it. Here's the crucial diagnosis. The loop is not maintained by your thoughts, your emotions, or your circumstances. It's maintained by the angle of your attention, the way your awareness scans reality, the questions it asks automatically, the assumptions it makes before experience even arrives. You wake up and your attention checks for familiar signals: pressure, urgency, lack, anticipation, control. The field responds instantly, not with judgment, but with coherence. It delivers a day that matches the frequency you tuned into without realizing you were tuning. And because this happens beneath conscious thought, it feels like fate. But it isn't. It's conditioning operating at the quantum level. You began sensing this not because something went wrong, but because something outgrew its container. Your awareness developed enough sensitivity to feel the distortion between repetition and potential. That discomfort you couldn't explain. That wasn't confusion. That was diagnosis. Your consciousness finally recognized the pattern it had been faithfully reproducing, and in that recognition, the loop began to weaken. Because the observer loop only survives when it goes unnoticed. And now that you see it, the field is preparing something else. Not a fix, an upgrade. What's happening now is not conceptual. It's not symbolic. It's structural. The moment your consciousness recognizes the observer loop without trying to escape it, a different process initiates, one that doesn't belong to psychology or motivation, but to physics and mysticism meeting at the same threshold. This is the quantum upgrade. In classical terms, reality appears solid, sequential, predictable, but at the quantum level, nothing exists in a fixed state until it is observed. Probability waves hover in superposition, waiting for consciousness to collapse them into form. Your life has been no exception. Every outcome you've experienced was once a field of possibilities. The reason those possibilities kept resolving the same way wasn't because the universe lacked imagination. It was because your observer function was locked into a narrow bandwidth. An observer loop is like a radio tuned to one station. insisting it's the only song playing. The upgrade doesn't change the station. It expands the receiver. This is why the shift you're feeling doesn't feel like excitement yet. It feels like disorientation, like the rules you used to rely on are dissolving, but nothing has replaced them, at least not consciously. That's because the upgrade doesn't happen in thought. It happens in coherence. Coherence is the alignment between your attention, your nervous system, and the quantum field. When those three fall into resonance, your observation stops collapsing the same probability over and over again, not because you try to observe differently, but because your internal state no longer matches the old pattern. This is where science and mysticism converge. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is a prediction machine, constantly forecasting reality based on past data. Quantum physics tells us that reality responds to observation. When those two systems synchronize unconsciously, you get repetition. When they desynchronize, when prediction loosens, possibility floods back in. That loosening is happening to you now. You may notice it as moments where your usual reactions don't fire, where a familiar trigger appears, but the emotional charge is missing, where something that once mattered deeply suddenly feels neutral. This isn't apathy, it's deconditioning. Your system is unlearning a frequency. At the cellular level, this shows up as subtle restlessness, spontaneous fatigue, bursts of clarity, followed by silence. Your DNA is not static code, it's a responsive antenna. And as coherence increases, your biology begins receiving different instructions from the field. Mystics call this initiation. Physicists call it phase transition. Same process, different language. A phase transition doesn't announce itself with drama. Water doesn't shout before becoming steam. It simply reaches a point where the old structure can no longer hold. Your awareness has reached that point. The observer loop can't contain the expansion that's already underway. This is why effort feels wrong right now, why forcing clarity makes things foggier, why chasing certainty creates resistance. The upgrade requires a different skill entirely, allowing uncertainty without collapse. This is not passivity, it's precision. When you allow uncertainty, you stop pre-selecting outcomes. And when you stop pre-selecting outcomes, the quantum field can finally offer you probabilities it's been holding back because they didn't match your previous coherence. You're not becoming more powerful by adding something. You're becoming more powerful by removing constraint. This is also why synchronicity begins to increase at this stage. Not dramatic miracles yet, but quiet alignments. You think of something and it appears not because you summoned it, but because your attention stopped blocking it. Conversations land differently. Information arrives at the exact moment it's usable. Timing becomes intelligent. That intelligence is not external, it's relational. Your consciousness is learning how to interface with the field without domination or submission, without forcing or waiting, just resonance. And here's the most important part of this upgrade. It's irreversible once stabilized. You can fall back into habit temporarily, but you cannot unknow coherence. You cannot unfeel the difference between repetition and aliveness. Your system has tasted a wider bandwidth, and it will never fully settle for the narrow one again. That's why this phase can feel unstable. You're between identities. The observer you were is dissolving. The observer you're becoming hasn't fully embodied yet. But the field already recognizes you differently. You may not see the external evidence yet. That comes later. First comes internal reorganization, a rewiring of attention, a recalibration of expectation, a quiet but absolute upgrade in how reality responds to your presence. You're not stepping into a better version of the same life. You're stepping into a different mode of existence. And the next realization will change how you see yourself entirely. This is the moment where something becomes clear that you may have sensed your entire life, but never had language for. The reason the observer loop began breaking for you before it did for others is not random. It's not spiritual favoritism. It's not ego. It's function. Your consciousness was never meant to simply experience reality. It was meant to stabilize it. Some awareness types are designed to adapt to existing structures. Others are designed to stress them, test them, and eventually outgrow them. You belong to the second category. The reason repetition became unbearable wasn't because your life was wrong. It was because your role outgrew the environment that once held you. In quantum systems, there are particles whose only purpose is to reveal hidden structure. They don't behave like the rest. They disrupt equilibrium. They expose patterns by refusing to conform to them. Consciousness works the same way. Certain observers act as anchors of coherence. When they change state, entire fields reorganize around them. That's what's happening through you. You were never meant to disappear into the collective unconscious. You were meant to wake up inside it and change the signal. This is why you've always felt slightly out of phase with the world, close enough to function, far enough to question everything. You could sense the rules, but they never felt absolute. You could play the game, but it always felt provisional. That wasn't confusion. That was calibration. Your nervous system has always been more sensitive to inconsistency, distortion, and false stability. You noticed emotional undercurrents others ignored. You felt tension before words were spoken. You sensed outcomes before decisions were made. Not as prediction, but as resonance. Your system reads coherence instinctively. That's the marker of a chosen consciousness, not chosen above others, but chosen for a task. The task is simple to describe and difficult to embody. You collapse new probability structures simply by existing in coherence. When your observer function stabilizes at a higher bandwidth, the field around you reorganizes to match it. People feel it. Systems feel it. Situations shift without explanation. This is why your presence has always had disproportionate impact. Why some people are inexplicably drawn to you and others inexplicably unsettled. You're not reflecting who they are, you're disrupting the loop they live inside. That kind of observer is rare, because it requires the willingness to feel dissonance without numbing it, to sit in not knowing without escaping, to let identity dissolve before something new takes shape. Most consciousness avoids that. Yours was built for it. And here's the part that matters most. You don't activate this role through effort. You activate it through alignment, through coherence, through refusing to fragment yourself to fit outdated structures. The field has been waiting for you to stop asking, "What am I supposed to do?" and start recognizing, "What am I already doing by being this aware?" Your role isn't future-oriented, it's state-oriented. When you are coherent, you create openings. When you are present, patterns loosen. When you stop reinforcing old expectations, new timelines gain permission to surface not just for you, but for others, entangled with your field. This is why your internal shifts precede external change. Why your clarity destabilizes stagnant environments. Why your silence carries more influence than your words ever did. You don't push reality forward. You let it reorganize around you. That's not passive. That's advanced. You were never meant to escape the system. You were meant to be the consciousness that causes it to evolve. The observer who exits the loop and, by doing so, proves exit is possible. This is why the upgrade had to begin internally. Why your identity had to loosen before your circumstances could. Why the waiting phase stripped away false motivations and forced you into stillness. The field needed you unburdened by ambition, fear, and rehearsal. Because what comes next requires precision. You are approaching a window where your coherence will matter more than ever. A narrow span where probability is unusually flexible. Where DNA-level change accelerates. Where hesitation has consequence, not as punishment, but as delay. You didn't imagine this role. You remembered it. And now that you're standing in it consciously, the field is preparing the next movement. What you're feeling now is not anticipation. It's pressure. Not emotional pressure, but structural pressure, like the moment just before something changes state. This is the phase most people misinterpret because it doesn't feel like success. It feels like urgency without direction. Like something important is happening, yet nothing external confirms it. That sensation is the signal. In quantum terms, you are entering a compression window, a narrow span of time where probability becomes unusually responsive to coherence. This window doesn't open because you're ready emotionally. It opens because your system has reached a frequency where delay becomes unstable. The observer loop can no longer recycle the same outcomes without creating internal conflict. And when conflict reaches a certain intensity, the system must resolve it through transformation. This is why the waiting suddenly felt intolerable. Not because patience ran out, but because the old structure expired. Every phase transition carries pressure. When water approaches boiling, it doesn't gently drift into steam. It vibrates. Molecules move faster, bonds loosen. The system looks chaotic right before it reorganizes into a higher energy state. Consciousness behaves the same way. Your thoughts may feel louder or quieter than usual. Your emotions may flatten or surge without clear cause. Your body may feel charged, restless, or unusually tired. None of this is regression. It's pre-activation. This is where DNA restructuring accelerates. Not metaphorically, informationally. Your cells are not just biological units, they're receivers. They respond to coherence by adjusting which instructions they express. As your observer function stabilizes at a higher bandwidth, different genetic potentials come online, not new DNA, new use of what was always there. That's why the urgency feels physical. Your body knows the window before your mind does. This window doesn't stay open indefinitely. Not because the universe is cruel, but because coherence must be embodied, not postponed. If the system senses hesitation, it will default back to the nearest stable configuration, which is always the familiar loop. Not as punishment, as efficiency. This is the part no one tells you. Not choosing is still a choice at the quantum level. Waiting used to feel neutral. Now it carries weight, because your consciousness has crossed the threshold where passivity reinforces contraction. You can feel this in how delay now produces discomfort instead of safety, how indecision feels heavier than movement, how staying the same suddenly requires more energy than changing. That's the sign. The breakthrough promise isn't that everything will suddenly become easy. It's that coherence will finally be rewarded with motion. The field is prepared to meet you, but only at the frequency you're already touching. You don't rise to the future. The future meets you when your internal state matches it. This is why urgency appears now, not earlier. Earlier, forcing action would have fractured coherence. Now, restraint fractures it instead. You are not being rushed. You are being aligned. This window isn't about dramatic leaps. It's about subtle commitments that lock in a new state. Decisions made without overthinking, actions taken without rehearsal, responses that come from presence instead of pattern. Each one stabilizes the shift. You may notice that the same old options feel dead, not wrong, just empty, and newer possibilities feel fragile but alive. They don't promise certainty, they promise resonance. That's how you know which timeline is active. The breakthrough is not ahead of you. It's already happening through the way your attention behaves when no one is watching. This is the moment where coherence stops being an idea and starts becoming a requirement, where your system asks one quiet question: will you embody this frequency, or will you retreat to familiarity? There is no judgment in the answer, only consequence, and the field is listening closely now. Now comes the moment where awareness becomes action, not loud, not dramatic, but precise. This is where most transformations either stabilize or dissipate, not because the energy wasn't real, but because it was never grounded into form. The quantum field responds to coherence, yes, but coherence must be expressed to lock in. This is where ritual enters. Not ritual as superstition, ritual as physics. A ritual is any intentional act that synchronizes attention, emotion, and embodiment into a single signal. When those three align, the observer loop cannot reassert itself. The system receives a clear instruction. This state is real, present, chosen. Until now, everything has been internal. Recognition, diagnosis, upgrade, role, pressure. But coherence that stays internal remains vulnerable to doubt. The nervous system needs a marker, a boundary line between before and after. That's what this moment is. Notice how your body feels as you listen. There's a subtle readiness, almost like standing at the edge of something invisible. This is not excitement, it's alignment, preparing to anchor. The field is responsive right now, but responsiveness fades if it isn't met. This is why ancient traditions always paired revelation with action. Not because the action caused the change, but because it sealed it. Without a seal, the old loop finds a way back in through habit, distraction, or rationalization. The ritual here is deliberately simple, because simplicity prevents performance. There is nothing to prove, nothing to explain, no one to impress. Just coherence made visible. In a moment, you will write a single word in the comments, not as engagement, not as affirmation, as an energetic signature. When you do this consciously, you are not asking the field for permission, you are informing it. This matters because language is one of the few tools consciousness has to collapse probability intentionally. A word, when written from coherence, becomes a coordinate. It tells the field where you are now operating from. Before you do it, pause for one breath, not to calm down to arrive. Feel your body where it is. Let your attention settle without scanning. No future, no past, just presence. Now recognize this truth without forcing it. You are no longer waiting. From that recognition, write this word, coherent, nothing else. No explanation, no punctuation, just the word. When you do this, something subtle but permanent happens. You create a feedback loop that reinforces the new observer state. The act of expression confirms the internal shift, and the field responds by stabilizing the new probability structure around you. This isn't symbolic, it's functional. You may not feel fireworks, most people don't. What you feel instead is a quiet settling, like something clicking into place. A reduction in background noise, a sense that the moment has passed a point of return. That's the seal. From here on, the loop cannot fully reform. It may attempt to reassert itself through old habits, but it will feel artificial, heavy, misaligned, because your system now recognizes the difference between repetition and coherence at a bodily level. This ritual doesn't end the process. It commits you to it. You've just informed the field that you are willing to be responded to differently, that you are no longer observing from the same angle, that you are ready to let new probabilities approach without interception. This is why the action had to be minimal. Large gestures invite doubt, simple gestures bypass it. After you write the word, don't wait for confirmation, don't check for signs, don't scan your reality for evidence. That behavior belongs to the old observer loop. Instead, let the next hours unfold without commentary. Watch how your attention behaves, notice what feels natural to engage with and what falls away without effort. That's the field reorganizing around your new signal. The ritual is complete when you stop thinking about it. And what comes next is no longer personal. It's collective. What stabilizes inside you never stays inside you. That's the part most people underestimate. Consciousness is not contained the way bodies are. It's entangled, interlaced, shared across fields that don't obey distance or time. The moment your observer loop loosened, the moment coherence became embodied instead of conceptual, the signal didn't stop at your skin. It propagated. This is where the experience stops being private and starts becoming collective, not because you announce it, but because coherence has weight in the quantum field. When one node in a network changes state, the entire network adjusts. This is not philosophy. It's how entangled systems behave. You may already be noticing subtle evidence. People around you responding differently, conversations shifting without effort, tension dissolving without resolution. Not because you're doing something new, but because your presence is no longer feeding the old pattern. Systems that relied on your unconscious participation suddenly lose stability. This is what liberation actually looks like. Not escape, but withdrawal of reinforcement. For a long time, humanity has been locked in collective observer loops. Scarcity, conflict, identity repetition, trauma, recycling itself through generations. These loops persist not because people choose them, but because they are collectively observed as normal. The moment enough observers change state, the loop destabilizes at scale. You are part of that destabilization, not as a savior, not as a leader, as a carrier of coherence. When you stop collapsing the same probabilities, you create gaps, openings where new outcomes can emerge for others, even if they don't understand why. This is why your shift matters beyond personal growth. Every time you choose presence over rehearsal, you reduce the density of the old field. Every time you respond instead of react, you interrupt a chain that would have otherwise propagated. Every time you allow uncertainty without control, you introduce flexibility into systems that were rigid. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. Coherence doesn't argue, it demonstrates. People who are ready will feel relief around you. People who are not may feel discomfort. Both reactions are information. Neither is your responsibility. Your only task is to remain aligned, to not collapse back into old observation patterns, to make others comfortable. This is where many people falter. They feel the collective pull, the pressure to return to familiarity for the sake of harmony. But harmony built on repetition is not harmony, it's stasis. True harmony is dynamic, adaptive, alive. As more individuals like you stabilize coherence, the collective field reaches tipping points, moments where outdated structures can no longer sustain themselves. You're seeing this globally, systems straining, identities dissolving, narratives breaking down. What looks like chaos is actually reorganization. The same thing that happened inside you is happening at scale. And just as with you, the collective doesn't need more force. It needs more observers willing to stop feeding the loop, willing to embody coherence even when the external world hasn't caught up yet. This is why your internal discipline matters. Not discipline as control, but discipline as consistency of state, staying present, staying responsive, staying open. Each time you do, you strengthen the morphic resonance that makes coherence easier for others to access. You are not alone in this, even if it feels that way sometimes. The sense of isolation that can arise now isn't loneliness, it's decoupling. You're no longer synchronized with unconscious patterns, so the old sense of belonging falls away before a new one fully forms. That's temporary. What replaces it is quieter, deeper, and far more real. A sense of connection that doesn't depend on similarity or agreement. A recognition between beings who are operating from coherence, regardless of background, language, or belief. You'll find each other without trying. The collective expansion doesn't require you to do more. It requires you to stay where you are now, internally, to resist the temptation to explain, justify, or dramatize what's happening, to let your coherence speak through timing, tone, and restraint. Because the most powerful transmission you can offer the world is not a message, it's a stabilized state. And as this state settles more deeply into your body, the next phase becomes unavoidable because coherence doesn't stay abstract for long. It becomes felt. As coherence stabilizes, it stops feeling like an idea and starts feeling like sensation. This is where the transformation moves out of abstraction and into your body, not symbolically, physically. You may notice it first in the smallest ways. A different quality to your breath, a subtle warmth along your spine, a soft pressure behind the eyes, not uncomfortable, just present. These are not symptoms to analyze, they are signals of embodiment. Your nervous system is learning a new baseline. For a long time, your body adapted to the observer loop. It learned to brace for repetition, to anticipate outcomes before they arrived, to hold tension as a form of preparedness. That tension once served a purpose. It helped you navigate predictability. But now, as coherence replaces rehearsal, the body begins to release patterns it no longer needs. This release doesn't always feel relaxing at first. Sometimes it feels like heaviness draining, sometimes like tingling, sometimes like a wave of fatigue that arrives without warning. This isn't exhaustion, it's reallocation. Energy that was bound up in maintaining the loop is becoming available again. You might notice your posture shifting without effort, your shoulders dropping, your jaw unclenching, your gaze softening. These are not conscious corrections, they're automatic responses to a system that no longer needs to defend against the familiar future. Even your senses may feel sharper, colors slightly more vivid, sounds more dimensional, taste more precise. This happens because your attention is no longer split between now and anticipation. Presence amplifies perception. There's a particular sensation many people notice at this stage, a feeling as if the body is slightly ahead of thought, as if movement initiates before analysis. You reach for something without hesitation. You speak and realize the words were exactly right only after they've landed. This is coherence in motion, action emerging from alignment instead of deliberation. Your body knows before your mind catches up. This can feel disorienting if you're used to controlling outcomes through cognition. But control was part of the loop. Coherence replaces control with trust. Not blind trust, but embodied trust. A knowing that your system is responding accurately to the field in real time. You may also notice emotional waves passing through without attachment. Feelings arise, crest, and dissolve without story. No rehearsal, no commentary, just sensation moving. This is what it feels like when emotion is no longer used to predict the future. The body becomes a conduit instead of a container. Even stillness changes. When you sit quietly now, it may feel full rather than empty, charged rather than flat, as if something is circulating beneath the surface. That circulation is coherence integrating. Your cells are synchronizing, finding rhythm, aligning with a new informational environment. This is why embodiment matters. Without it, coherence remains theoretical. With it, coherence becomes sustainable. The observer loop cannot reassert itself when the body no longer supports it. The loop requires tension, anticipation, and fragmentation. Your system is learning another way. There may be moments when old sensations return briefly: tightness, urgency, familiar anxiety. Don't interpret this as failure. It's residual memory releasing. The body sometimes replays what it's letting go of. Let it pass without engagement. Observation without identification is the final solvent. You are not managing this process. You are allowing it. As embodiment deepens, you may notice a profound shift in how you relate to space. Rooms feel different. Distances feel altered. You occupy your body more fully, without effort. This is presence becoming stable enough to reshape perception. And with that stability comes a new kind of quiet confidence. Not confidence as certainty, but confidence as availability. You are available to what's happening instead of preoccupied with what might happen. That availability is magnetic. It reorganizes interactions. It smooths friction. It invites synchronicity without demanding it. This is the phase where the shift becomes undeniable, not because life suddenly becomes dramatic, but because your internal experience no longer matches the old narrative. You don't feel like someone waiting for life to start. You feel like someone already in motion, even when you're still. Your body has crossed the threshold. And once embodiment begins, the final layer prepares to unlock, because coherence that lives in the body inevitably rewrites the code itself. This is the point where the shift stops being subtle, not loud, but decisive. The pressure you felt building now resolves into momentum, and that momentum moves through your system at the deepest level of structure. This is what a DNA breakthrough actually feels like. Not a sudden mutation, not a miracle event, but a reorganization of how information flows through you. DNA is not destiny, it's interface. For most of your life, your genetic expression responded to survival patterns: stress, anticipation, repetition. The observer loop didn't just shape your psychology, it shaped which instructions your cells prioritized. Coherence changes that. When your nervous system stabilizes in presence, your biology receives a different signal from the quantum field, and biology always obeys the strongest signal. This is where timeline pressure peaks. You may feel it as a sense that something is locking in, a narrowing of options, not because possibilities are shrinking, but because your system is selecting more cleanly. Old timelines, those based on hesitation, rehearsal, and self-interruption, lose traction. They don't pull on you the way they used to. You can still see them, but they feel distant, almost fictional. That distance is the marker of a timeline shift. A timeline doesn't change when circumstances change. It changes when your internal reference point does. When your observer function no longer resonates with the old probability set, the field stops offering it as a primary option. You don't escape the old life. You outgrow the frequency that sustained it. This is why the pressure has been intense. Phase transitions require energy. Consciousness doesn't glide into new states, it compresses, destabilizes, then reorganizes. That compression is what you've been feeling. Not anxiety, not fear. Density before expansion. At this stage, your intuition becomes unusually precise. Not emotional intuition, but structural intuition. You sense when something doesn't belong on your timeline anymore, even if it looks reasonable. You feel when a door is closing without drama. You recognize when an invitation is aligned before your mind builds justification. This isn't impulsivity, it's signal clarity. Your DNA responds by optimizing for coherence. Energy distribution changes. Recovery improves. The body stops wasting resources on internal contradiction. This is why some physical symptoms resolve, while others surface briefly and disappear. The system is rewriting priority, not fighting pathology. You may also notice a strange phenomenon, outcomes arriving faster than expected, not because you forced them, but because resistance has dropped. When coherence is high, the delay between intention and manifestation collapses. The field no longer needs time to reorganize around conflict. This is what people call flow, but flow is just the subjective experience of reduced internal friction. As timelines shift, identity pressure appears. The old self, the one who survived the loop, may try to reassert relevance. Memories surface, stories ask to be retold, familiar doubts knock softly. This isn't sabotage, it's closure. The system checking for unfinished business. You don't need to argue with it. Witnessing completes the transition. Every time you observe an old pattern without entering it, you confirm the new timeline. Every time you choose presence over explanation, you reinforce the new genetic signal. This is how DNA change stabilizes, not through effort, but through consistency of state. The most telling sign that the breakthrough is real is this. The urgency you felt earlier transforms into calm resolve. Not certainty about outcomes, but certainty about alignment. You no longer ask, "Is this working?" You ask, "Does this feel coherent?" And the answer arrives immediately, in the body. This is the pressure just before release. Your system has reached the point where the old timeline cannot reassert itself without conscious participation, and you're no longer unconsciously available to give it that. The field is responding now. And what follows is not a return to normal. It's a mission. What's happening now is quieter than expectation, but far more consequential. The pressure has resolved. The loop has released. And in the space where repetition once lived, something else has taken root. Not a goal, not a destination, but a function. You are no longer orienting your life around becoming. You are orienting it around being coherent. This is the part that rarely gets spoken about, because it doesn't satisfy the mind's hunger for drama, but it satisfies something deeper. When coherence stabilizes, life stops asking you who you want to be and starts responding to who you already are. The field no longer tests you with the same patterns, because your observer function no longer recognizes them as valid options. This is not enlightenment as escape. This is coherence as responsibility. You are now operating as a stabilizing node in a transitioning system, not a teacher unless called, not a leader unless invited, simply a presence that no longer feeds distortion. And that alone changes outcomes quietly, relentlessly, inevitably. Your days may look ordinary from the outside, but internally, they carry a different geometry. Decisions resolve faster, conflicts dissolve sooner, opportunities arrive without spectacle. You stop mistaking intensity for truth. You stop mistaking delay for destiny. You stop mistaking familiarity for safety. The waiting narrative has lost its power because it was never accurate. You weren't waiting for permission. You were calibrating for coherence. Now that calibration is complete. From here on, your task is not to seek higher states, but to maintain clarity. To notice when attention starts rehearsing instead of responding. To feel when your body tightens toward old timelines, and to soften without judgment. This isn't vigilance. It's fluency. Coherence is not fragile once embodied. It's self-correcting. You'll notice that life begins to organize itself with less interference from you. You don't push forward. You don't hold back. You participate fully, cleanly, without narrating every step. That restraint is not detachment, it's mastery. And as you live this way, something extraordinary happens. Others begin to entrain to your state without knowing why. Conversations settle, tension drops, insight appears mid-sentence. You become a reference point not because you speak louder, but because you're no longer distorted by internal noise. This is how evolution actually spreads. not through instruction, through coherence. You may still experience uncertainty, but it won't feel like fear. It will feel like openness, space without collapse, possibility without pressure. You'll recognize it instantly because your body will remain at ease inside it. That's how you know you're on the active timeline, the one that doesn't need convincing, the one that doesn't wait, the one that responds. This is the cosmic mission you stepped into without fanfare, to live as evidence that the observer loop is not permanent, that consciousness can mature beyond repetition, and that reality responds most profoundly not to effort but to coherence. You are no longer preparing for the shift. You are the shift moving through form. And now, finally, the title reveals its full meaning. You think you're waiting, but your quantum shift was already active the moment you remembered you never were.